Imagine the last flicker of a candle inside a rotting Virginia mansion. The year was 1892, and the servants whispered of girls who were never allowed to leave the upper floors. When one of them suddenly vanished, no one called the sheriff. No search parties were formed. Instead, the shutters were bolted tighter, and the Wainwright name, wealthy, untouchable, swallowed the silence whole. To this day, the records hold no trace of her. Only the question, what secret did the Wainwrights guard so fiercely that an entire town chose to look away? The Wainwrights were not just another Southern dynasty. Their money was old, predating the Revolution, steeped in tobacco, iron, and whispers of older trades never listed in ledgers. By the late 19th century, Patriarch Henry Elias Wainwright had become a figure of awe and dread. He funded churches, orphanages, and entire rail lines. Yet no one dared speak of his household, where curtains never parted, and his daughters were paraded like fragile relics, not women. The town depended on his fortune. Dependence bred silence. There were 3 sisters, Clara, Margaret, and Eliza Wainwright. They were seen only on Sundays, veiled in lace, seated beside their father in the front pew of St. Augustine's Church. Townsfolk described them as angelic, pale as candle wax, never smiling. But what unsettled people most was their eyes. Not youthful, not innocent eyes that carried something ancient, resigned, as though they had lived too long in a single locked room. The preacher praised them as paragons of chastity, yet the servants whispered another word, prisoners. On rare occasions when tradesmen were admitted to the estate, they noted a section of the house barred by heavy oak doors. The girls' wing, they called it. Windows nailed shut, curtains rotting from disuse, and strange scratches along the door frames, as if someone had tried to escape. One carpenter swore he heard sobbing behind the walls, muffled by him, singing from the drawing room. He never returned, and the account survives only in a fragment of a diary discovered after his death. Those who worked in the Wainwright house spoke in fragments, never full sentences. Maids whispered warnings to each other in the kitchens, careful to let the fire swallow their words. One laundress described dresses brought down from the locked wing, bloodied at the seams, lace torn as though pulled in desperation. Another spoke of lullabies sung not by the sisters, but by their father, his voice soft and coaxing, carrying through the halls at midnight. Many quit without explanation, but not one reported their suspicions. The reason was simple. Leaving the Wainwrights meant no job, no home, and in some cases, no future. It was said Henry Wainwright could end a life without ever lifting a hand. The church played its part. Father Alcott, head priest of St. Augustine's, praised Henry as the model Christian patriarch. He spoke of the daughters as blessed vessels, chosen by God to preserve the Wainwright line. Parishioners grew uneasy when sermons shifted toward the language of sacrifice and inheritance. When Margaret Wainwright fainted during communion, pale lips stained with red wine, no one dared speak of possession or violation. The pulpit and the pews alike were bound in complicity. Scripture became a mask covering what could not be named aloud. In March of 1894, a fire consumed part of the estate's west wing. It was never investigated. The local paper printed a single line, minor blaze at the Wainwright property, no casualties. But the townspeople knew. They saw smoke curling for days, smelled the char of burning cloth, and heard cries that sounded less like panic than ritual. Days later, Eliza Wainwright stopped appearing in public. Her name was never spoken again. Some said she perished in the fire. Others whispered she was walled inside the mansion, buried alive within her father's house. It was not ignorance that protected the Wainwrights, but dependence. Henry Elias owned the mills, the schools, and most of the farmland. He funded the poorhouse, but only for those who kept their mouths shut. Mothers warned their children never to wander near the estate, not for fear of danger, but of being noticed. When Clara once walked through town alone, eyes darting, lips trembling as if to speak, the sheriff himself escorted her back home. Afterward, he avoided the topic for the rest of his life. The whole town knew something unspeakable lived inside that house, and still they chose silence. By 1896, Clara Wainwright, the eldest, had grown gaunt, her skin almost translucent, her body brittle as though drained from within. At a charity dinner, she collapsed mid-prayer, her face striking the table with a hollow thud. Witnesses swore her father did not rise to help her. Instead, he placed a hand firmly on her shoulder and whispered something directly into her ear. Clara stopped trembling, stood, and continued the blessing as if nothing had happened. The town praised her as pious, but those present never forgot the sound of her gasp, sharp, desperate, animal, as if she had been forced back into her role against her will. A fragment of Margaret's writing was discovered years later, hidden beneath floorboards during renovations in the 1920s. The pages are brittle, the ink smudged, but her words remain haunting. We are not daughters, not sisters. We are vessels. We are mirrors of him. When he looks upon us, he does not see us. He sees himself reflected, multiplied, reborn. The diary describes hymns twisted into lullabies, punishments carried out in silence, and a recurring phrase carved into the wood of her chamber. Blood is not divided. The most chilling line reads, "He says I must give him what mother could not." In 1898, Father Alcott, the very priest who praised the Wainwrights from the pulpit, vanished. He was last seen leaving the estate late at night. His carriage was found overturned near the river, but his body was never recovered. Some whispered he had threatened to expose Henry's sins. Others believed he had been absorbed into the family's secret, consumed by it. Afterward, a new priest arrived, one who never spoke of the Wainwrights at all. The sermons grew tame, stripped of their fire, as though fear had smothered the voice of God itself. Local boys, daring each other on summer nights, once snuck into St. Augustine's basement. They found a room sealed with chains, its door carved with the initials H.E.W. Inside were shallow basins, bone-dry but stained black. The air reeked of iron. Some claimed the Wainwright sisters were baptized again and again in those basins. Not with water, but with something thicker, something binding. The boys never spoke of what they saw until decades later, their accounts matching too closely to dismiss. Whatever rites took place there, they were never meant for public eyes. In 1901, a traveling artist was commissioned to paint the Wainwright family. The finished work, still rumored to exist in a private collection, has been described in chilling detail. Henry seated at the center, his hand resting not on the arm of his chair, but on Margaret's bare shoulder. Clara stands to his left, pale hands folded in front of her, but the folds of her dress seem distorted, as if hiding something writhing beneath the fabric. Where Eliza should have stood, the canvas is smeared, unfinished, as if the painter's hand froze mid-stroke. Witnesses who saw the portrait claimed the eyes of the sisters followed them, unblinking, filled with sorrow and complicity. The artist fled Virginia and was never heard from again. By the turn of the century, the town that once thrived under Wainwright wealth began to rot from within. Crops failed mysteriously, livestock were born twisted or stillborn, and entire families fled westward, abandoning homes to decay. Those who remained believed the land itself had soured, poisoned by sins unspoken. Some whispered that the Wainwright estate fed off the town, draining it like a parasite. Whenever sickness spread, the Wainwright mansion seemed untouched, its windows glowing late into the night, as though lit by something other than oil lamps. In 1903, Clara vanished. The town awoke to tolling church bells, though no death had been announced. For weeks, Henry carried on as if nothing had happened, still attending services, still giving charity. When asked of his daughter, he would simply smile and murmur, "She is within me." The servants told a darker tale, that Clara's room had been stripped bare, the bed burned in the courtyard. One swore he saw Henry himself carrying bundles of cloth down to the cellar, humming softly. No body was ever buried, no record of death ever filed. Clara was erased, consumed by the silence of her father's house. After Clara's disappearance, Margaret was the last visible sister. She grew increasingly frail, her once perfect posture bent as though under an invisible weight. At Sunday service, she clutched her father's arm so tightly that her knuckles bled. Witnesses described her whispering during hymns, not the words of the song, but phrases no one recognized, guttural and broken. By 1907, her hair had gone completely white. Then, like her sisters before her, she too vanished from public view. Only Henry remained, a man who seemed to grow stronger, more vigorous as his daughters faded. By 1910, the Wainwright mansion stood like a tomb, windows boarded, gates locked, the gardens wild and strangled by ivy. Henry Elias Wainwright lived alone, or so it seemed. Rumors spread that strange noises echoed from the upper floors. soft singing, weeping, and the dragging of chains across the wood. Children dared each other to creep close to the house, only to flee at the sound of a woman's voice calling from the windows, "Help me." Yet when anyone returned with others, the house was silent, the windows dark. The estate became a monument to fear, its secrets sealed within. In 1915, Henry was found dead in his study. His body sat upright in the chair, eyes wide, lips curled into a grotesque smile. Around him were photographs, faded, fragile, of his daughters at various ages. Each image had been altered, faces scratched out, replaced with his own. In the fireplace burned a final letter, half-consumed, with only a single line still legible: "Blood is not divided." The funeral was lavish, attended by politicians, priests, and businessmen who owed him their fortunes. Not one mentioned the missing daughters, not one dared. Section 19, the discovery in 1923, when new owners attempted to renovate the mansion 8 years later, they found the locked wing untouched since Henry's death. Behind a bolted door lay 3 small rooms, each containing a bed, shackles affixed to the frames, and walls carved with thousands of words, prayers, pleas, curses. But what froze the workers were the remains, fragile, brittle bones arranged neatly under the floorboards. They belonged not to 3, but to dozens. Some believed the Wainwright sisters had borne children, conceived in silence, erased before they could ever leave the house. The remains were quietly removed, never reported. The mansion was boarded up again. The story of the Wainwright heiresses faded into rumor, then into silence. The town rebuilt, the church forgot, and history erased the name from its books. But the curse lingered. Even today, descendants of those who lived under Wainwright rule speak of strange dreams, of women calling from darkened rooms, of a presence that passes through bloodlines. Some say the Wainwright sisters never died, that their voices are still inside the house, bound to their father, bound to the sin that the world refused to see. And perhaps that is the true horror. Not that such things happened, but that they were allowed to. That an entire town, an entire system, looked away. So that silence itself became the final accomplice.